Today is May 11th, 2024. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Oki, Naganago, Mekoche Chistokomaki, or Dekots Nagotine Siku. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson. I use she and her pronouns, but I am trying to incorporate they and them as well. And so you're welcome to use whatever you'd like. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake tribe in Treaty 11. My people wore rabbit skin, so it's been referred to as the land of the hare people. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene Nation is uninvited to this area of Clincho Tene Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary, or in Blackfoot, Mokinstis is Michelle Elliott, an English name, which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. Acknowledging proximity to whiteness is important because the darker the skin, the more racism a person experiences, and the more people you surround yourself with whiteness, the less colonial violence at times. I don't know if I agree with that, but I do know the more white people you have in your life, the more you're less likely to get mistreated in the sense like you have to adapt in white code anyway. That's a whole conversation. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene. My Indian Act and Post status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I'm a daughter in the Mayflower, daughter in the American Revolution, while having a Canadian Indian Act and Post status card, which is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two Spirit, or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ plus community, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socioeconomic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. According to the 2023 Quality of Life report by the Calgary Foundation, 31% of racialized Calgarians can't even find suitable employment. 31%, folks. I am not a social worker, nor an elder, nor do I speak on behalf of all Indigenous. I just share my journey as a Dene mother navigating this colonial, misogynistic, racist world in 2024. As a trauma informed Dene woman who's attempted to run, joined harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at expensive conventions, left my home to travel to those conventions just to vote on incomplete policies that still allow for incarceration, a denial of justice, a denial of health services, racism, colonial trauma, and genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples. I have worked to continue, reports to advocate for, and attempt to work within these systems that are meant to harm me and my community. I think of all this today, and I hope we honor the many Indigenous lives lost for the so called country named Canada. I hope you all see the role in the importance of stopping harm, and as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation and as a treaty partner. And I would also add that if you are a person that starts to understand colonialism and land dynamics right now, today, we are just seeing 2 days of the Edmonton and Calgary police services beating the crap out of our own children, our students, at these university campuses right now. Pride Month should never be 1 month. It is important to understand that the straight agenda and gendered violence was and is forced on these lands by Christian outsiders. The land acknowledgements are critical for creating that safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as the guest and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in a so called time of reconciliation. Can they be performative? Of course. It's important land acknowledgements have that meaning. I encourage everyone to introduce themselves with their acknowledgement of their ancestors, story of displacement, how you perceive your role as a treaty partner, a citizen of Canada, a refugee, or other land displacement, so we as Indigenous people know how safe you are to be around. If you won't acknowledge your local Indigenous names, you don't know how to pronounce them, you won't say your pronouns, won't say your story of origin, won't acknowledge stolen lands, imposed economic oppression, or your role in reconciliation, I determine how safe you are to be around my community, my family, and myself, because we face the most colonial violence based on ignorance or worse, willful anti-Indigenous biases. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is Indigenous 101 because it immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally. That's why settlers and those who call themselves native Calgarians or whatever town you're from show me you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. Jesse Winte's book on Reconciled explains this perfectly, as do many Indigenous authored books. Land Back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by colonialism and capitalism, but it would be a part of a treaty partnership, part of meaningful reconciliation, and honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I'm speaking to you on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfeet south of the opposed US-Canadian border are the Blackfeet, or the Umskam Bibi Gunny, and north of the border are the Siksika, Kainai, and Baguni of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7, signed September 22nd, 1877, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Goodstoney, formerly known as the Wesley, Chiniki, and the Goodstoney is formerly known as Wesley Nation. The Chiniki and Bearspaw nations of the Stoney, or a lot of people now say Yeeharhi, and the Dene from Sutina. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit, status and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening and watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd just love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. Also, giving a review helps whatever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And I have a friend with me. I will let them introduce themselves in their way.
Oh my goodness. Hello. My name is Tom, or Birthday Girl is my drag name. I use like he and him pronouns, or like sometimes he and they. I don't know. It sort of changes back and forth. Um, but yeah, no, drag queen, Calgary. Actually, I live just south of Calgary in Okotoks.
Oh, that's a fun place to be. That's a lot of, they call them expats. It's like a mini Little Britain right there. Hey,
It's actually funny. I actually grew up in England and then moved here when I was 12. So
there
yeah.
you go. I don't know why. I have no concept why it is so many expats go there. And it's funny how expats is a term we use for British people, but not for anybody else.
Right? I know. I know. It's you know what I actually think it is I think in England, and my experience is so minimal because I was so young when I moved here, but
Sure.
we don't have cities like the sheer size of Calgary in England. We don't have that.
Mm.
So I think Okotoks is a bit more relatable, right? It's people who've lived in those like smaller communities now gravitate to smaller communities because the cities are so scary.
Yeah, and
But
they're big. They're so big. I don't know what that right answer is too, because like I know we have a Denny elder who passed away. His name was Patrick Deranger, and he brought his dad from up north, so they're from Fort Chip, and he brought him down to just see the city. And he was pretty blown away. But then he took him for dinner up in the Calgary Tower, and he was like, "Wow, you know."
yeah. Oh yeah.
So I think about that. I had wished that the Calgary Tower would have taken that story and and told it. But I know like it's so unfortunate that Calgarians hate natives so much, because it's like all these great stories that could have been told that will never
Yeah.
be told because of anti-indigenous hate, right? So it's and that I just hope that other natives who might be listening just imagine that, right? So yeah, this city's changed a lot. I was born here in 77, and I think there was like, I don't know, 200,000. And then when like it was only about 400,000 for the longest time, and now it's like over a million people. And so it just grew like that in my lifetime, right? Like over doubled in my lifetime. And it's so wild to me that
Yeah.
Calgary is Calgary right now, and like there's so much developers making millions of dollars, with colonialism, selling and buying properties and developing. And yeah, I
Mhm.
think it's really wild, and I don't know how to talk to other people about it because they don't already want to listen to what I have to say about how wild this is to watch Calgary grow like exponentially in my lifetime. I remember when Braeside was like the edge of town.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
Mhm.
And like there was hardly any development north of 16th Avenue on the east side, right? Like this is all new, all of it.
Oh,
And people don't know it. They don't see that. So, and worse, they even say, well, that's just the east side. And it's like, but it's funny how people with money like immediately go after people like that wealth disparity that's here in Calgary.
yeah.
It's like, well, they don't make as much money as I do, so they are lesser than, you know, such a prominent attitude here.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. The way, I just, my blood boils when it comes to conversations like these because, like, and I don't mean to pop off about it right away. It's just like, it annoys me because, like, every person, and maybe it's so cliche, every person has a different story.
Yeah.
And it's got nothing to do with your money or where you live or what you do. Like, it just, I can't. I have like goosebumps because I'm so shaking mad whenever I think about those types of things, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
oh God, I can't. I mean, listen, I will always listen to anything you have to say, Michelle, because it's amazing. Like,
Yeah.
I can't, yeah, I can't. It's so good.
Yeah. What did you think of these incredible like conversations that were happening at city council for like 2 weeks of like a bunch of folks being like, we can't change the zoning because
Yeah, yeah. Again, like my blood boils when I think of conversations around these things. Like and I think it really annoys me because everybody has an opportunity to do something better,
yeah.
right? And like, it doesn't matter what that thing is, but every person has an opportunity to do something better. And whether it's sitting at city council and just sitting there and saying, we can do these things and you can do these things, there is compromise. But it's how hard both sides are willing to work to find the compromise. That's the problem. Is one side is always willing to work harder than the other, and the others or one side always has a reason to not want to find a compromise.
Right.
Right?
It's so wild to me like, but my property value, where show the data where your property value is going to go down, like it's just so wild to me. And I mean, I own a house and I know what it's like to have to pay insurance. And if you haven't done your siding recently or your roof, it's considered, you have to get it done. And if there was a fire in the house, like they look at that, they're like, well, when was the last time you did your siding? And it's like a depreciation of your car where it's like, well, we're not going to cover that because, and it's like, but it was great. Like it was fine. So, and like, thankfully, knock on wood, we haven't had to deal with that fire stuff. Oh, that was me because I knocked on wood.
Oh no, your poor puppy.
Yeah, no, this part of my podcast is Hugo
Oh,
Boss.
dogs are
Um,
more than
yeah,
welcome here.
dogs and cats, they hop up a lot on the Zoom calls now. So
I love it. I love it.
yeah, so yeah,
Oh,
I think about that where people don't even know. And we've had two firebugs a lot. So more recently, like not too far away, and it was kind of a drug house, so we know it was that, but ironically it was the other houses around it that went on fire first. And so I'm like,
oh,
what? Yeah, no, we're the whole community's like, oh my God, like this is our big community gossip, right? And then about 10 years
uh-huh.
ago, we legitimately had a fire bug, and so somebody was lighting like garages and such on fire. And so that was over not too far from here. And I was like, holy. And but the media wasn't calling it that, and the police weren't calling it that, or the fire department, but it was pretty clear because they were all arson related. And so anyway, and then they stopped. So that guy must have either died or moved on. I don't know. So so
I hope
anyway,
nothing.
we have fires in the area. So I think about the depreciation of everything. That like when it comes to actual insurance, they do everything in their power not to actually pay out, and you have to pay out of pocket. And so I've been feeling really bad for all of the wildfires that are happening and all of the folks struggling with that. And in my community, in the Indigenous community, like there were floods in Manitoba, and people still aren't housed from that, and that's 10 years ago. So like there's we talk about housing, but we don't really talk about like all of the issues and that bigger picture now since the pandemic and inflation, like everybody's houseless. I had a friend from high school sleeping on my couch for a month. My reconciliation action group and I pulled together some funds and got him housed. And so, it's been almost 2 weeks now, and we're hoping he's doing okay. He reaches out now and then, but his ex and his kids are in a hotel. They've been in a hotel for a whole year now. So, yeah, it's just really dark, dark times right now, and people aren't really talking about that. So it's tough. I don't know. Anyway, I don't know if you want to talk about housing so much. I just ended up on that topic.
No, no, I totally get it. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm very lucky to live in the place that I do, and but it doesn't I think the thing is with housing, and I'm gonna say this, and you can tell me either what you think of it or something, but every person who drives around Calgary, who has a car, who drives, who leaves the house, sees the amount of unhoused people.
yeah,
Whether they want to acknowledge them is a different thing.
yeah,
Everybody sees them.
yeah,
They know it's a problem.
yeah,
The city knows it's a problem. Every resident inside the city knows it's a problem. They're choosing not to acknowledge it or
yeah,
make it better. And I think real unfortunate part that I think people especially won't acknowledge is that a large portion of them are Indigenous folks.
yeah,
And right. And I mean, I don't even know kind of how to put it into words, right? Because I acknowledge it and I see it because I'm in the communities that I am. And so we have these conversations a lot.
yeah,
But crossing it over into the sort of the privilege-ridden, class-ridden communities where they choose to see the blinds that they like on a house versus the person sleeping on the sidewalk in front of said house is where the problem lies, right? And housing is just such a big thing that just and I mean cities and people who are in those, because this people like you and I, we can't buy houses for everybody.
no,
As much as I'd love to buy an entire neighborhood and house everybody in it, I can't do that.
yeah,
But there are people in Calgary and on these lands that have enough money to do that,
yes.
right?
Yeah, well,
It's
and why aren't we having conversations about portions of all sales going to the treaty? Like this is Treaty 7 territory. We're supposed to have equity. We're not getting half. We're not sharing at all. And so I would argue that there does need to be an understanding of, treaty partnership there. But to be fair, Treaty 7 and a lot of the treaty partners aren't pushing that because there are a million things for them to do within their own mandates, right? And so as I think as like an urban native, who has a platform to talk about these issues, like we should start pushing for this type of conversation, because as far as I'm concerned, there should be a representative of Treaty 7 in every council meeting all across Treaty 7, and there isn't. And like for example, I tried to push this during the elections, and I have in my previous podcast. Every school trustee board can have an appointed Indigenous liaison. Zero have done it. Zero. And
yeah.
so, like, I ask my allies, can you help me push this? And it's not getting pushed, right? Like, it's like, again, out of all of the things, like, there are students getting the crap beaten out of them by the police right now on student campuses. So, it's like, do we talk about appointing an Indigenous liaison, school trustee, or do we talk about that? And so, those conversations don't end up happening when they should, because we all know education is like the root of the problem. The Senator Murray Sinclair, retired Justice Sinclair, one of the co-chairs of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, outright said that education got us in this mess, education's going to get us out of this mess, and yet we have an opportunity to appoint Indigenous school trustees in every school board, and don't have that. The opposite, We have them being very hostile to Indigenous parents, Indigenous students, and small little pockets where an Indigenous student might be safe. But like we had an experience at one of our local schools in junior high that was horrendous. I think it should burn to the ground. I just can't even believe that they would treat a child that poorly, but that's what it is. And my child is not any different than the Black child who had a dreadlock literally pulled from his head with no accountability from the school on that as well. And I have a good friend on the Reconciliation Action Group that's been struggling with that Calgary Catholic school incident that happened out in Cochrane. It's horrendous, and cops in schools, don't even get me started. Don't I've tried to talk to people about these issues, and it goes in one ear and out the other. I don't know what to do about it anymore. It's so infuriating that people think that this society is acceptable to continue doing this, and worse, do backflips to be like, colonialism is great, cops are amazing, teachers are fabulous, and we don't need any more Indigenous people in positions of power. Like there's one anywhere. Yeah.
I was gonna say, I'm like, let me just flip into the other dimension real quick because that's what they're talking about. Like that there are no Indigenous folks in power anywhere.
I know.
Like
I know.
I I mean like name one. Like I'll
Yeah, I
wait.
know.
I mean,
Not in Calgary. I cannot think. And in fact, like my last podcasts are about the Indigenous gathering place, and like
mhm,
an Indigenous led society somehow getting pushed out of the conversation when it comes to trying to find a space. Like we have zero
yeah,
space for anything.
yeah.
And so when you see all of the, houseless Indigenous people on the streets, there's no correlation there's no correlation, right? Like, and in our world, like, we know culture is prevention, but yet we know I can't go light a smudge in any municipal building without permission, and we had to fight
Uh,
so hard to be able to do it at Mowata. I don't even know if they'll let the next generation do it, because what they like to do is, like, you spend years trying to push for an issue, and as soon as they can get rid of you, which they did, um they have a new person come in and they don't educate them on all of the hard work that it took in order to get this done, right?
yeah.
Like it's just so horrendous, how settlers justify their racism. So from my point of view, I'm glad that you're willing to talk about houseless Indigenous people. We have given them solutions since 1996 and beyond that, but in one ear and out the other. And like, I know city councilors who don't even know they have their own Aboriginal department. They don't even know. Yeah. So
Uh,
yeah.
there's such a disconnect, Michelle. Like
Oh,
I just I think I could talk about this for days with you.
please
So
do.
yeah, we have nothing to do for the next 3 days, so we're gonna
Yeah.
sit here. Um, um, no, I just, and I'm not gonna go on forever about it. It's just infuriating because that I think to what I'll say to me as a white, colonial like settle in the most purest form, right, coming from England, is that like we see these things and it is the first thing that we see when we go into places like the city or really anywhere, and some, are more um some places where there are unhoused Indigenous folks are more concentrated than others, but it's we have to we as white colonial settlers on these lands have to encourage, and I'm going to say this as a general statement, we have to encourage the people and the groups that we work and live and play in
Yes.
to not only share the acknowledgement that we need to look for these folks when we're in the city, we also need to take accountability to learn active ways that we can help them
Yeah.
in a way that's meaningful for them, not for us. And then we also have to ensure that we're paying attention to what the cities are doing, what the governments are doing, what the programs that we are being told are there to help them are actually doing,
Yeah.
and what their mandates are to do. And quite often, those are like those first three places when I have conversations with people, because I sit down here in Okotos, which is a predominantly white,
Yeah.
straight community that and I mean people like Okotos is a Blackfoot term, right?
Yeah,
And there's so many people that don't even know that.
I know.
And I'm like, how are you living here? You're literally living on the land in a place that is named in Blackfoot and you don't even know.
I know. I know.
It's
It
crazy.
it's wild. I when the Syrian refugee issue happened, Mayor Nenshi at the time had a town hall at the library and was willing to engage with community, like how are we going to do this, what are we going to do? And I stood up and I said, I think beyond just the Syrian refugees, like every single person that lands in Calgary in that international airport, the first thing they should smell is our smudge. The first thing they hear are our drums. The first thing they see is us in regalia.
Mhm,
That's what it should be. and
mhm.
um and he took that talking point in a different way and whatever, used it nationally, but that bigger picture, that's never been implemented, and I would argue like we could implement that nationally, where we have these white hat volunteers at all of the at the Calgary International Airport. We should have Indigenous people paid to be there, as far as I'm concerned, and every airport in Calgary, in Canada, sorry, and beyond, like the ports and such, like there should be Indigenous people. My husband and I used to teach scuba out of Banff, so we interacted with tourists all the time, and they would say, "Where are the Indigenous people?" I laugh,
Yeah.
and I'm like, "How much time do you got?"
Uh,
so that's the whole thing, is that like there should be predominant Indigenous folks at all of the national parks talking about Canada, because the tourists want to see us and are
yeah.
disappointed when they don't see us at the airport and at Banff, and having conversations and displays and conversations about all of these things. Like, I would love to talk about and see apologies everywhere from all of the settlers, but at the very minimum, just put out some information,
Yeah.
just minimum. I don't know if you heard about Fort Calgary renaming themselves to the Confluence, but yeah, so they've rebranded themselves, and it was one of those things that I didn't even know this. Like, so Fort Calgary was originally called Fort Brisbois. We had a whole bunch of French like area here when the Métis and the settlers first came to Calgary to start building Calgary. And
Mhm.
so there's a book I love. It's called The Importance of Monogamy, Nation Building in Alberta by Sarah Carter. It's my favorite book. I think every Albertan has to read it. And anyway, it talks about forcing English patriarchy and land theft basically into Alberta, and how to build Alberta to be for white landowners. That was the premise of it. Forcing Christianity, right? Forcing uh what else, the straight agenda on these lands, all of that, right? So it's all in that book, and so I think it should be mandatory reading for every Albertan. um so anyway, Fort Calgary only existed for like 3 years, and Mawada Armory was it's kind of like the fort for Calgary for all the colonial folks there, and that took delays to build as well. But bigger picture, that has changed hands from CP Rail, et cetera, as well. So, the Confluence being the meeting place for Indigenous people for thousands of years, like that is a relative place to talk about Indigenous heritage, as well as when the settlers came and the Métis came to build Calgary into a city, right? So, and then renaming all of the names to something either English or my background is geomatics, so the way we do grid systems as well for mapping, etc. Changing it to avenues, streets, etc., the four coordinates, all of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just find it hysterical. And it's like, oh my God, but what about our heritage? I'm like, where do you want to start? Let's go far back. Or are you sure you want to call it Fort Calgary then? Do we
Yeah.
want to start acknowledging French were a part of Calgary building? I know you don't.
That's it. No, you don't.
I know you don't.
Yeah.
So yeah. So anyway, I don't know why I got on that tangent, but yeah, just that they renamed Fort Calgary to the Confluence, and it is going to be like a historical museum kind of conversation talking about the roots of Calgary. And yeah, and there's a gathering place that they're supposed to be putting on that property, but it seems like um Fort Calgary's basically trying to take it over with their own Indigenous committee, which is crazy because we have a whole like nonprofit that's Indigenous led. And so it looks really shady from my point of view to be like, why are you shutting out these folks?
So
Yeah.
they're not using something that's already formed.
Yeah, for years, like literally years. So and I know that they signed with the city that it would be in that area. So like it's literally two entities working together on the same property, but I can see that there's like that's not happening, and that which is really problematic.
Yeah, that seems like they're not interested in using the authentic history of Indigenous people, as it looks like they're looking to use a narrative.
Yeah, I know.
Like,
I'm really concerned of what's going on there. So I'm hoping that that's going to get kind of sorted out and the two entities are going to come together and talk about their relationship in a good way. But right now I'm just kind of watching it, and nobody's seeing this. Like nobody. It's not on if I wouldn't talk about it on the podcast, I don't know if anybody would talk about it at all.
that's insane, actually. That like I haven't heard of that. Like
Yeah,
I
it's not in the news or nothing. Like I'm just watching press releases going out from both camps. And I'm like,
yeah.
my God, what's going on here? And I was dealing that with one of our indigenous led shelters, and
Mhm.
and it's being taken over by non-indigenous people. And it's like this isn't even in your minutes. Like you're not allowed to do this. But we had like elders, the founder, talk about it, and people are still like not getting it. So it's really sad because that anti-indigenous bias is so prevalent that they
Mhm.
can't even see like politics. Like if it was Sean Shu and Giancarlo Corra fighting with each other, that would be front page news. We'd all be talking about it and all gossiping about it.
Yeah.
But when it's indigenous people, everybody's like, oh,
Oh yeah.
so yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's it's so crappy because it's like that dehumanization. I forgot you don't see us like people.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Like oh my God. I can't even do it. I wish everybody saw, I'm gonna say this without trying to sound like a narcissist.
yeah.
I wish that everybody could see Indigenous people the way that we as queer people see Indigenous people.
Mm.
And I don't like, and that's not, I'm not speaking for all queer people. There is a lot of bias inside this community as well.
Oh my God,
Um,
yes.
yeah, right. And a lot of infighting and a lot of different things. But
Yeah,
for the most part, most queer people, and maybe it's because in a very different and a bit of a lesser way, we almost share some of the same struggles. There's a tiny bit of
yep.
crossover, right?
Oppression dynamics for
Yeah,
sure. Yep.
yeah,
Um,
right.
I
Oh,
don't know
sorry.
if I've told you about voices and sovereign spirits before. When Black Lives Matter Toronto stopped the parade in 2016, that started conversations here about racism in the queer community. And so Voices was like this umbrella BIPOC, QT BIPOC group. And I've been talking about missing and murdered Indigenous women and violence against women since the day I was born, because I was born in it. And at that time the conversation wasn't really understood about how two-spirit are indigenous,
Mhm.
gendered, they experience gendered violence in a very different intersectional way. And so I felt like even the committees and the groups that talk about missing and murdered indigenous women and girls were purposely excluding the two-spirit. So I'm like, the most marginalized people are two-spirit, and a lot of natives would be like, and a lot of non-indigenous were like, why, well, this sounds like a native issue, not an us issue. And I'm like, they're fucking gay people. Come
Literally.
on.
Yes. For
Come
real.
on, you guys. Get with the
Huh.
fucking program.
Yeah.
So, and I seen that in my own family where it's like, where
Yeah.
do I fit? You don't fit nowhere. You don't fit in the Indigenous community. You don't fit in the non-Indigenous community. And so, our two-spirit aren't even properly cataloged when it comes to going missing and murdered. And
Yeah.
it's not acknowledged. So like let's pretend I was a lesbian and I was murdered, and my own family rejected me being a lesbian. So when I died, wouldn't acknowledge that I was a lesbian. Or worse, transgendered, when folks are murdered or go missing, it's not acknowledged their, name they chose and their pronouns that they chose.
Yeah.
Right. So those stats are just totally gone and under the radar. So I've been advocating for the two spirit because this is an issue that needs to be predominant. And here's the irony. Here's the ironic part in Indigenous community. Prior to colonialism, Indigenous people were the most sacred. They are the most sacred today. It's just that
Yeah.
we had to decolonize a lot of our residential school survivors and our reses because they have this mentality that the Catholic Church has taught them to hate gay people. So like even my own family, it was like I had to school my own family sometimes, like how you can't say that like
Yeah.
these are more sacred people. And so then that there's that problem of it was beat into them, but
Yeah.
also are they, like my own family doesn't give themselves permission to be native and respect our traditional ways. They like there's a struggle there, right, internally, and that's their healing journey. It's not something I can force on them. So I'm
Yeah.
not even as mad at the, older generation for hating gays because they were taught to, and worse, they were sexually abused. And because our society in Western culture associates this together, they see pedophiles in a wrong way, and they
Yeah.
lump them as part of the queer community when they're not. And
Yeah.
so like there's been a lot of like decolonizing our own people, but then what does a two spirit who's just born and just sacred and just trying to live do?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, so that's been a real issue. So anyway, voices was like supposed to be all QT BIPOC, but that was really hard because there was me and another fellow, we had to really educate all of
Yeah.
the people of color who were queer on their anti-Indigenous bias. So it was
Yeah.
incredibly exhausting. And then a lot of like the gay community were like, what the hell is this straight queer or this straight cis girl telling us about our community? And so it was just like, it sucked. It was the worst time. And then make it 10 times worse, trying to work with the police, and the police just being such ignorant pricks. And we're seeing it really bad right now,
Mhm.
to the point where it's like I don't know. And so yeah, that's a bit about voices. And then Sovereign Spirits was like just an Indigenous led organization that they had going to try to um talk about queerness and what that looks like in an urban setting. So, and that was
Mhm.
really hard as well. So it was really hard with no funding, and only recently has there been some funding devoted towards prides, but most of that funding just goes to cops. So it's crazy, that wild, sorry, I shouldn't use that term. It's wild to me how police still get more funding for being the problem, and
Mhm.
there's no accountability to that funds at all. So
Mhm.
I just, our world is so messed up sometimes. I just don't understand. And then you have like, white queers that are like, oh my God, I love the cops. And I'm like, okay, but when 90% of QT BIPOC are telling you they're horrible and awful to them, like, where's the disconnect there? Like, do you really want to do that to your own community? And when the
Yeah.
answer becomes yes, that's the worst. So
Yeah.
then you
Yeah.
end
I
up
think
with, yeah, go ahead.
it's sorry, I was just gonna say it comes back to that class conversation that we were
Yeah.
having earlier. In what way were you raised? In what part of the city were you raised? In what sort of income were you raised under? Right? Like
Yeah.
that's where that comes from. I think to me, that's where the disconnect is.
Yeah.
But
And
I don't.
statistically, we know that white gay men, they have a massive income as opposed to lesbians, women, and then transgender, of course, and people of color being at the very bottom. So,
Yep.
like it's a real issue here. And so
Mhm.
when you had typically a whole Calgary Pride board of, white males running it, we had to have the Trans and Dyke March.
Yeah.
And that was its own thing because there was so much disconnect within the own queer community, let
Yep.
alone add that intersectionality of racism, right? So, and colonialism.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I just when I had come out and then going through like my early 20s, like I turned 30 this year. So through my early 20s, right? Like the only part of the queer community I had seen was a twisted element. And it was like and that was through those years of white gays, and that was it.
Yeah.
Right. And like you barely ever saw anybody who was trans. And if you did, um, it would
Yeah.
come with a slur and it would come with all of these other things. And that wasn't necessarily Twisted's fault. It was just that that was the culture at the time. Um, and I think it's changed so much since then. And now, I think right now, we as a queer community, especially in Calgary, we're going through the two-spirit conversation right now. There's a lot of talk around two-spirit folks, but I also think there's a lot of misunderstanding around two-spirit folks,
Sure.
right? And there's a lot of, I think everybody has a, they don't really know what is the right thing to say about two-spirit folks, or what is the right thing, or how do we refer to them, or what is the history behind them, right? Like things like that.
Yeah.
And it doesn't help, like you said, when pride boards or when pride organizations are predominantly made up of white people, because there's no personal what is the word? There's no personal attachment to the issue. So
Yeah.
they don't care to talk about it, right? So, and how do we push that? How do we even have how do we make it so that pride organizations offer resources, material, learning situations where that are focused around two-spirit folks or just
Hmm.
Indigenous folks in general,
Yeah.
right? Like how do we make, because pride organizations get some of the biggest funding in the world, right? For pride organizations, because it's trendy to be part of pride right now. But
Yeah.
being part of pride is equity for everybody, including Indigenous folks, including two-spirit folks, including Black and BIPOC folks. Like, and there just isn't, right? There's that disconnect there. So we're seeing all these crazy different disconnects, and it's all hurting each other.
I know. I have a horrible rumor. And I'm trying to figure out who to talk to in Toronto. But basically, what happened was they were given millions of dollars, literally millions. 8 million was the number I heard. This is all rumor, all speculation, not confirmed, to promote Two Spirit and to promote QT BIPOC in general. And I'm like, great. And then what had happened was it was white people in charge of the money. Somehow it all went missing. There was no programming for Two Spirit, and now they had to pay back like 2 million of the eight. And I'm like, there's like six. What's going on? So like
Yeah.
I want to know what is happening. And from my point of view, it's like, let me guess, 6 million went to the police. Like let me get, so I have to really research that. So that is just a rumor, speculation. I don't know the entire situation, but that bigger picture, that is a real reality that we are facing. And what Indigenous programming is there for Two Spirit? Because I know I tried to talk to one of our organizations that are for the queer community, that are part of the resources that I give at the end, and I just outright tell them, like, we had really bad reactions from this one group. And so I don't want to promote that to QT BIPOC. I want to promote it to white queers. Look how much shit you get. Awesome for you, but it's not safe for QT BIPOC, in my opinion. So
Yeah.
I'm very concerned about that because, my child feels very like, well, I mean, one, they're just a teen. So, and all teens have angst, and they're convinced there are no lesbians in the city. And I'm like, there are lesbians, babe. They are lesbians your age, I promise you. And they're like me, where it's like black and white sometimes thinking, and it's like, they can't go on certain apps because they're not 18. And I'm like, oh my God, when they turn 18, what's going to
Mm.
happen with these
Oh
apps? And I'm
God.
so worried about gendered violence, but it is what it is. So bigger picture,
Yeah.
and thank you Lavender Club for being amazing. I'm just going to give Lavender Club YYC a shout out. If you're all not following them, follow them immediately, because I think that's the only Instagram that really gives my child that look, we exist. We're here.
Good. Good. That's
Yeah,
good.
but I'm going to give a shout out to USAY. This is a great Indigenous led society here, and it does great programming and it has representation so my child doesn't feel alone. And they're really great at including them at everything they do. So I just, thankfully we're navigating this, no question, but that bigger picture is that there should be more resources for Two Spirit. And I think it's back to the conversation we had earlier about the confluence, where you have an Indigenous led organization, you have a white led organization, but this same politics comes into the queer community where it's like, they don't want to work with Indigenous people where they're at. They want to take over and speak for. And so I've had lots of people say, not just about this organization, but in general about natives. They don't always return my emails, and I'm like, well, I'd like to read that email. Let's tell you
Okay.
why. Let's see why we didn't reply to that email.
Yep. Yep.
Because I
100%.
get some doozies, and I know people hate it, but I'll like put it up on social media and be like, so don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And I might retract their names sometimes, but that bigger picture, it's like, come on, you guys, like, you're a condescending prick. You really gonna send an email like that to somebody? Like, if this was a white guy at Suncor, would you have sent that email? No.
That's exactly it.
No, you would not have done that. So like there is this like infiltrate, like this belief system that we are lesser, that is white supremacy. Like I know people think white supremacy is like pointy white hats and burning crosses, and that is white supremacy. But white supremacy is also that, oh my God, you're such a cute articulate little native with such pretty outfits.
Yeah.
We get that
Yeah.
shit so often. And I'm just like, oh my God, look at you and your pretty colored hair. Oh my God. And I'll just give it
Yeah.
right back to them to show them how ridiculous it sounds. And some people
Yeah.
get it and some people don't. White fragility is such a fun thing to do. I mean, what are you going to
Yeah.
do? At a certain point, like you can't help but make fun of it. I don't know. It's just so ridiculous.
Well, it's also not your job to break down other people's white fragility. It's not your job to make them feel comfortable in your presence.
I
Like,
know. It's
it,
wild to me, this like
oh,
disconnect with like people, and but that and it's unaddressed white supremacy, right? Like it's that true belief system that someone's better than someone else for, like you said, class, whatever. And anyway, yeah,
yeah.
I hope that we can start giving proper programming for everyone. And yeah, do you have any questions about Two Spirit that you want to ask that maybe will help our listeners as well?
Yeah, like so I have just a couple of questions for you kind of regarding the because like with me being on stage a lot and I have a lot of conversations and of course we do like a land acknowledgement and then I do a piece where we talk about how an acknowledgement is just that. It's an acknowledgement and what happens to the acknowledgement. Oh, look, the cat's dead. The part that's missing is the active tangible change,
Yeah.
which would be to pick the cat up, bury it, give it a funeral, da 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 da. And when it comes to the conversation of a land acknowledgement, that's sort of where, like, I say it's about active, tangible change. Listen to Native Calgarian, do these things that read the 94 calls to action, but there's only a certain amount of things that I know as being on my own journey. I didn't even care about Indigenous issues until I was in my late 20s because I finally got out of parties, and drinking and whatever to care about these kinds of issues. And so I want to ask you sort of two
Mhm.
main things. And one would be where where do we go from here? Like what is the resolution
Mhm.
to the problem?
Yeah. Well, first education. So For me, obviously, I promote the Blackfoot Crossing. Blackfoot Crossing is about our contact from the Blackfoot's point of view, and that's where Treaty 7 was signed. So it's a good start for understanding our relationship as Canadians, and education again in the education system itself. So again, promoting Indigenous led education within our public education in general. I'm a little more extreme. This isn't like, again, this is not me speaking on behalf of all Indigenous. I cannot wrap my head around why we fund and have Catholic public schools. Can't do it. They have done nothing but harm and hurt. Every other day is some new principal that was molesting somebody. And I can't understand why Calgarians are like, I'm such a proud Catholic and I'm so okay with pedophiles being, transferred from one school to another, because that's what happened in the TRC too. And we documented it. We told people, and yet we still fund public Catholic school. I'm alone on that. Don't get me wrong, but the education system, we absolutely can start appointing Indigenous school trustees. I would argue they're going to be very harmful because I've met the school trustees and they are beyond racist. They're like, I can't be racist because I grew up in Calgary's Northeast. Like, explain what?
Hmm.
That makes you like 10 times
Yeah.
more racist. Actually, that statement is so
Uh,
harmful and painful.
uh,
I can't even. So, and then you have
yeah.
other ones that are like, I acknowledge Indigenous people exist. Like, that's, oh my God, we're supposed to applaud you. Way to go on acknowledging we
Yeah.
we exist. So we need like some substantial changes. Call to Action 57 is all public servants must have Indigenous education and anti-racism training. I have yet to see a school board take that on, really. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um, Calgary Catholic or Calgary Board of Education has some report out that's like care and like you have cops in our schools. Come on, there's no
Mhm.
accountability for what happened to my own daughter, let alone beyond. They have these institutions that protect themselves. They protect pedophiles. They protect problematic teachers, etc. So it's really horrible. They need strong anti-racism training. So like you and the community obviously can advocate, and when you go to vote, get to know the school trustees that are running and be like, what is your plan for meaningful anti-racism training? What is your plan for meaningful Indigenous education? Now, I just between you and I know that there are some incredible Indigenous folks in positions of power in some of these schools that are doing really great work. Conversely, I know some really shitty ones that are
Yeah.
not doing great work and just are there for the paycheck and are literally causing harm really in the long run. Regardless,
Yeah.
we need to have meaningful policy change. And because we
Mhm.
don't, we just see it perpetuating, right? That lack of you not knowing, the next newcomers not knowing, the next generation not knowing, because we purposely keep them this information, right? So I run a book club, obviously to help educate folks, but also to unpack, the content, because the other part is that when non-Indigenous people interpret an Indigenous book without an Indigenous person helping them, it can get ugly and messy. Now, granted, I'd rather people have a book club in their little union, in their little school, to talk about Indigenous issues and start unpacking it together than nothing. But, I just, anyway, mine is open to the public. It's on my podcast for folks who miss it, so that way it's at least available if they're interested in learning. But beyond me, like we have amazing Indigenous podcasts that are like they're fun. I
Yeah.
much prefer fun ones, actually. I don't know why people listen to me. I'm so grateful they do, but I annoy myself a lot talking about policy. So voting for people who are open to anti-racism policies in Indigenous education, and not just school boards, but also beyond. I would love to have my non-Indigenous allies make people understand the gravity of appointing an Indigenous school trustee. Um, it might take some anti-racism training to get there from the folks that I've met, that's for sure.
Yep.
Yeah. But educate themselves. Like we all have to do this education because our school systems are failing us nationally, not just at the K to 12, but also at the post-secondary. And I mean, that's always been my solution. What's the solution, Michelle? We need Indigenous education, K to 12 and post secondary. And the U of A has this great free program, Indigenous education free program. Anyone can access it. Dan Levy, he was actually promoting it because he took it. So he used his platform for like over a year to promote this free Indigenous education from the U of A. So yeah, obviously everyone should take that as well. I've been meaning to. I've heard like snippets of people telling me parts of it. But I will say this, like I had this, she's in academia, she's in social work. She's so problematic. She is such a white supremacist. She didn't understand her entitlement to do this. She took some Indigenous education once upon a time, clearly out east. And she was like, McWitch Michelle. And I'm like, I just smiled and nodded. And she's like, McWitch Michelle. And I'm like, okay. And she's like, you are supposed to say it back. And I'm like, holy entitled white bitch, what the fuck are you saying to me? I didn't say it like that. That was what's going on in my head. And I'm like, you realize that's like making, so I'm Satudene, we're on Blackfoot territory, and you're using like an Eastern language. So that's like me saying, bonjour, you're
Yeah.
supposed to say it back. And she just not getting it. And rather than acknowledging her white fragility, she didn't, and had this big flip out. And she wanted me to apologize to her like I'm the one in the wrong. But that's white supremacy speaking, right? That's white fragility speaking. So like for folks who do take your U of A free Indigenous course, not an excuse to be more shitty to Indigenous people, to assume that we're gonna like, oh my God, we're so happy you took it, McWitch. Like, why would I say that? I say Masi Cho. That's what I say. So
Yeah.
someone says Masi Cho to me, I'm like, and I appreciate that they took the time to learn, because this is the other thing. There's like 700 of us. There's 700. So over 600. I want to say 634 with a bunch that are not recognized. So we have that many nations in Canada as opposed to what, 13 provinces and territories.
Yeah.
And for somebody to be so white supremacist to assume I want to say McWitch in somebody else's language to me, I have a bit of a problem with some of the education that's out there right now. Anyway, a lot of everything is based on Eastern Anishinaabe 7 teachings. And I'm like,
Right.
why are we talking about that here on Blackfoot territory? I'm Dene. We have 9 laws we go by. Like, why are we teaching? And so we have all of this Eastern influence in our education system, which is like kind of drives me a little wild and crazy. And so, but it is what it is. At least it's better than nothing. If you're
Yeah.
out in Toronto, that matters a lot. But when you're out here, it's like, yeah, oh my God, the 7 sacred teachings. And I'm like, yeah, they're great. And then they don't go against the 9 Dene laws or, Blackfoot protocols, but we're on Blackfoot territory. Why are we not learning Blackfoot teachings instead of like some Eastern belief system? But that's what decolonizing is, right? Like it's process. It's going to take time, and it's going to take time to get there. So education, holding your politicians to account, those are the main things that you can do. But like honestly, we have to educate ourselves in order to move forward, because our politicians are fucking dropping the ball so hard at every order of government. It's so
Right.
pathetic. Yeah.
Oh, goodness.
I
Well,
know.
that's good that I mean, it's good that there's some very specific ways and honestly easy and accessible ways for people to acknowledge and work and do make active, tangible change for the Indigenous communities, right?
I have a whole stack of like books I'm looking at right now. I have like 21 things you may not know about the Indian Act, the story of the Blackfoot people, Blackfoot ways of knowing, settler identity and colonialism, the TRC, like there's so much to that's a free and accessible, right? Like the national inquiry is free for the queer community. Like I want to stress this. I will never. Maybe I'll put it on my tombstone. The 231 calls to justice help the queer community. It helps all QT BIPOC.
Right.
But when I
Yeah.
read, so our book club looked at the national action plan for from the queer. Oh my God, it is so worthless compared to the national inquiry. Like the national inquiry is beautiful. It has beautiful stories. It has art in it. It has
Mhm.
tangible things for everyone to do, from Canadians to institutions, etc. And it has a whole queer section. Like there's tons of queer sections. Like it always encompassing queer people, and yet they needed the national action plan, which is a horrible report that doesn't go into depth about nothing. And then we have the national
Yeah.
inquiry, which is this beautiful report. So if the queer community could
Yeah.
like read the national inquiry and see themselves in it, like they would see themselves in it, but they would also see the solutions in it too. And same with white women. Like I wish they would read it, because it's like all this gendered violence you are exposed to, guess what, the answers are in that national inquiry. But there's such a disconnect, and colonialism is really good at going, oh, this is for white women, this is for people of color, this is for natives, this is for, and it's like, come on, this
Yeah.
gendered violence and racism,
Yeah.
right? So it helps everybody. It's like, how great is it that as a white woman, you don't have to deal with racism, but you have to deal with the internalized white supremacy. Like that's your goal, right? As opposed to this.
Yeah.
And I was raised white. I literally had to do that myself and try to differentiate like what I was hearing from one family member to another family member, and trying to unpack what that looked like. So yeah, I just wish we all
Right.
seen our role in that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, that's great. I really needed, and like the main, like when I messaged you, like the main thing was like I need to talk to someone who understands the issues and can articulate them,
Yeah.
because I'm a talker, right? Like I was on the radio for so many years and like all these things, and I'm like, I need to talk to somebody who can talk. So, and that's great. And you also just put it in terms that I understand as well, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
as a person who doesn't spend a lot of time around Indigenous people because there aren't any, really out here, or I should say they are, but our Indigenous folks out here don't come out. We don't see them because they get subjected to violence and they get
Yeah.
subjected to racism. And even in a small sleepy town like Okotoks, and honestly, like Okotoks is one of the main like vials into like the reservations around here, like the Sutuna and the down oh my goodness, I don't even know
Siksika.
what direction. Yeah,
You're
Siksika.
surrounded. Yeah, you're surrounded. Siksika is east of you. Sutina is west of you, and south of you is the Blood tribe. So the Gainai
Right.
Reserve.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And exactly, right? And the unfortunate, I think the other thing too, like I think for anybody who is listening to your show, who maybe like me, who is, white, like colonial settler in the purest form, it's what I notice out here in these small sleepy towns is we see Indigenous folks, when we do see them overnight.
Mhm.
And it's because they either feel that it's a safer time for them to come into town and do what they need to do, or it's a time where they won't feel as unwelcomed on the land that is originally theirs, right? And it's up to us to I mean, if anyone's listening that's in Okotoks, it's up to us to ensure that this community is a safe place for them and that they know that,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's like, I don't know. Anywho, that's a whole thing. I do have one more thing that I'd love to know from you.
Sure.
Um, is let me put it into words, because I have so many feelings around this entire conversation that we've had in like the Indigenous communities and our community. Um, I would love to know what in the future, like as we besides education and besides the things that we've kind of talked about, on a day-to-day basis, what are some things besides listening to the Native Calgarian? What are some things that we can just do on a daily basis? Can we send emails? Can
Yes.
we, like what are some things that we can do?
Yeah, I would argue you can always send an email. I would love to have, and I had this conversation at my 30 high school reunion, the amount of people that don't engage with their civics, right? Like, um, your counselor, your school trustee, your MP, and your MLA should all know you. And the fact that they
Mm,
don't, I'm not gonna lie, emails aren't as effective as like talking to them face to face.
no.
However, emails obviously is what we can do sometimes. It's just what we can do. So
Yeah.
so for example, yeah, oh geez, not that long ago I was talking about when the council decided to take the doors off the shelters, the bus shelters, when it was minus 40, like, that literally caused death
Yeah.
and amputations, and everybody seemed okay with it, and I asked people to write, and they wouldn't, and I can't wrap my head around that. I can't wrap around my head, like, this is so painfully obvious. What are we doing? And then, recently we had a lot of the, encampments torn down by the police, and everybody seemed okay with that, like, that was something they coulda wrote for. One of the things that I do, that I struggle with actually, I face a lot of racism from pharmacists and doctors on this is I carry Narcan with me. Indigenous people were supposed to be able to have Narcan to dispense, and I face so much racism. But white people can get naloxone kits anywhere at any pharmacist, and I ask people to, always carry 2, one to give away and one to use if you need to. And if you are finding you're in spaces that you never are able to give them away, then that means that, like you talked about segregation literally without saying the word in Okotoks. At the end of the day, there has to be an acknowledgement that we're segregated. But if you're downtown in Twisted Element, you see us, right?
Yeah.
And that's the very least when somebody asks you for money, you can offer a naloxone kit. When you're driving and you're stopped and a homeless person asks you for money, you can offer them a naloxone kit, right? Like that's easy and tangible. And then you can start taking it further if you want to and have a whole backpack and have like tampons and pads and first aid stuff and hand sanitizer and deodorant and clean underwear. Like you can make homeless little kits that you can give to people if you want to, depending on your resources and such. But I mean, we all go to the dollar store and spend $10 on nothing, and you can spend $20 on a homeless kit and give that away to, all you have to do is offer granola bars, water, whatever you can do. They'll usually take it and appreciate it even because you treated them like a human being.
Yeah.
And a lot of our folks just don't get treated like human beings. Fuck, man, I'm a like suburban mom, you know, married,
Oh,
and I don't get treated well. I can't
yeah.
imagine the barriers they face. I can't even imagine. So, and seeing my friend, couch surfing, he spent lots of time in shelters. When him and his spouse broke up over the course of the year, like the violence that he experiences and the inability to be able to stay sober, like there's not the resources available, like contrary to what people think. And I talk a little bit about being non-status. A lot of natives are
Right.
non-status. They're visibly native, so they get all of the shit kicking of racism, but no benefits at all of it. They just get that intergenerational trauma and trauma from colonialism today. Like it's ugly, and a lot of
Yeah.
non-indigenous don't know because they just don't know. Nobody knows, and we're not teaching it in the education system. We're not teaching it even in like I win speaker, APTN, CBC Indigenous. There's some resources available for some people, but they're not talking about the shit I'm talking about because they
Yeah.
can't. Like I just recently met one of my absolute favorite people I look up to. Her name is Tanya Talaga. She is an author of 2 books. She's about to have a third book come out, and she wrote for the Toronto Star and writes for the Globe and Mail right now. She just came here, and
Mm,
and she would, and I, like, we're older. She's in her 50s. I'm in my 40s, almost 50, And we
Mhm.
talked about 10 years ago, like she wasn't even allowed to write about Indigenous issues at the Toronto Star. Like it's that recent that we're even allowed to talk about it. And I know people don't like us talking about it because God forbid people start seeing natives as human. And
Yeah.
I want to leave you and the listeners with this too. Unlike the Palestine and Israel issue, we're not saying you all have to leave. We
Mhm.
just want to have treaty in good faith. It's just that simple. You know, treat us well, treat us equally, stay. But that bigger picture is that we're not getting treated equally, right? So that's where the problem is.
Right.
And so, you're not going to hear natives be like, get off our land. But I see white people think that. And I'm like, I think you're
Mhm.
missing the point here that the crown owns 90% of the land. And that's problematic, when we're not in charge of the governance of it. So, like if people could open their mind to what this looks like in a better way, in a more equitable way, we could live together quite well. But this dehumanization and this hate that has been taught to folks, like, God, unpack that, right? And for us, like, we're just trying to heal, and as soon as we do, we get another kick from a cop or a kick from a social worker or a kick from a teacher that's just like, God, will this place ever get better or worse work? Like, I give the stats of how horrible work is for us in this white society. If business could unpack the embedded racism there too, and go from there. So but there was two things that you said through the course of this that I thought was funny. I did mention the segregation part, on like it wasn't said without it being said. So I wanted to name it and say, we're
Yeah.
still segregated. But that bigger picture too, when you're talking about twisted element and it being so horrible and it's gotten better, I am so old. I remember when that was an abandoned building. I remember when this pizza place went in. It was such good pizza. Oh my God. And then I remember when Twisted Element went in there. And now it's been there for, I don't know, a good 10 years at least. I don't know. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think about that. I
Yeah.
think about,
Well,
I'm so old.
I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, I've been I've been there for 12 years. I've been going there for 12 years. So,
sure, sure. And
and I
you've
think it's
seen
been there
12
for
years change. Yeah. Oh my
yeah.
God,
And I
I'm
mean,
so old.
listen, I
Yeah.
also need to mention that there's still so much work to do in there, but yeah, that's so interesting. You've just been around. Hey, you've been around the block a time or two.
I remember like having to have my gay friends allow me to go into Boys Town because you needed a membership in order to get in there. But like being legitimately afraid going in and coming out because you'd have a bunch of stupid cowboys that were really closeted that were just gonna beat you. And I never experienced that, thank God. But that's the benefit of being straight and cis, right?
Yep.
And yeah, I it breaks my heart to know our history here. And what's funny too is when, because I'm old and my daughter, like she hears the history. I'll just do a plug for Kevin Allen's book, Gay History in Calgary. Great book, recommend it to everybody. um, that area of the Beltline being called the Fruit Loop, she thinks it's
Mhm.
funnier than hell. I think she's going to get a Fruit Loop tattoo. And I'm like, no, it was a derogatory term. And but from the gay community is so good at like owning that. But then I say that, and like this Indigenous creatures, like we own Indigenous creatures and something else, because like the media derogatorily called us Indigenous creatures. And then a totally different separate issues, they had like these demographics of like white people, black people, Hispanic, Asian, and something else.
Mhm.
And so the natives like totally own that, like we're just something else.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So yeah, just there are parallels in our oppression dynamics 100%. And I think that's why I respectfully understand. I usually just charge people these types of conversations, but I was like, not other folks who are experiencing oppression
Oh,
dynamics, no way. So thank you for being on my podcast. And I said to you off air, you're welcome back anytime to talk about anything. Is there any shows or anything you have coming up that you wanted to promote?
Oh goodness. I don't know what I can say or talk about. But just every Saturday at Twisted Element, myself, Misty Meadows, we do the Saturday Spectacular, and it's we use that as one of the biggest platforms for drag in the city, besides, a couple of other places, and a couple of other organizations. Shout out to Calgary, Calgary. And uh, yeah, no, just that show, and we love to see people in it, and we love to platform people too. So,
Yeah.
people are listening and they want to come be part of the show. Let's be part of the show.
Oh my God,
Um,
Tom. I'm so glad you came on my show. Thank you. And just know, my I see the queer community as my community just simply because I have so many family members that need a healthy community, just like the Indigenous community needs a healthy community. So I just anything I can do to help support your community, please let me know.
Yeah, and right back at you. I'm committed, starting by this conversation, I'm committed to like learning more about the Indigenous communities and how we can help, and not just standing on a stage every Saturday and being like, read the 94 calls to action. Because,
Yeah.
it's about, I also have to do something because I can't expect other people to do it if I don't,
Yeah.
right? Which I wanted to
I
start with.
I hope the national inquiry is becomes like those 231 calls to justice, they matter. And so, and we have the government of Alberta coming out on Moosehide Day asking the community, what should we do? And I'm going to be like wheeling in all of my, why aren't you doing anything on your 113 pathways to justice? So they took the national inquiry and they looked at it and they were like, okay, we'll make 113 pathways to justice. But I'm educating them on it. They don't know about it. It drives me mental. So,
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, I'll show you all of these things. We'll go from there. Thanks, Tom, for being on the show.
Thank
Awesome.
you.
Oh, so for folks who are listening, you're always welcome to our book club. It's just a Zoom link. It's the second Monday of each month. We have the Reconciliation Action Group where I call out the Calgary Catholic School Board for being themselves. I'm proud that this podcast has given solutions and included cultural safety training and cultural first aid, and all of them to create a safer space for Indigenous peoples, people of color, those with disabilities, and to us LGBTQ to speak. According to the 2023 Quality of Life Report from the Calgary Foundation, 88% of racialized Calgarians feel uncomfortable or out of place because of their religion, ethnicity, skin color, culture, language, accent, gender, or sexual orientation, which was up from 75% the year before. I'm sure next year will be even worse. 84% of racialized Calgarians believe racism exists, while only 66% of non racialized Calgarians do. I want to say thank you to Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fritkin of heretohelp.bc.ca for this great section on what is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it. Their work in those cultural action tools exists, so please support Indigenous work like that as part of your reconciliation work and settler understanding. I'm just lucky enough to highlight and repeat it here. Internalized racism and lateral violence is another form of violence folks in these oppression dynamics face by the structure of racism imposed on these lands. Go give your money to Donna Bevins at racialequitytools.org. She has tons of resource files, including what is internalized racism. So, those who come from oppressed groups, we have to work on our oppression as well in order to not perpetrate it onto others. Do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Committee. So if you see a drag queen or king or a Muslim person or an Indigenous person in their ribbon skirt being accosted by somebody, what do? You go to afsc.org and you go to their resources and you go to their do's and don'ts bystander intervention to understand what to do so that you know when you see the racism, you don't end up doing nothing. For the Asian community, if you see or experience racism, you can report it at acttoendracism.ca, or you can text them at 587 507 3838. They recently put out a great report. I highly recommend everybody read it. I wish anyone who follows me on my social media would watch the anti racism organizational lead for the city of Calgary give a presentation on the journey of becoming an anti racism leader. They have a YouTube link that it's available to anyone. Just Google Journey of Becoming an Anti Racism Leader, and you'll see City of Calgary. You can click on that, take an hour of your time. Locally, we have the Black Lives Matter activists Taylor McNally and Adora Nofer that were being legally targeted. While they have dropped the charges for Adora, there's still so many funds that need to go towards this for Taylor. So you can go to Stop the Stack YYC to learn more. Indigenous people have been talking about our issues, sharing our traumas in reports, commissions, and public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians and their policies and their platforms. If they don't recognize oppressed groups in their budget with gender equity plus, if they're cutting Indigenous education and violence prevention programs and services, uterus health choices, gay straight alliances, lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities, know that your vote is directly negatively impacting oppressed folks. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to actions, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, 1996, folks. The multiple reports about child welfare reform, violence prevention, and now 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. Provincially in Alberta, the county government created 113 pathways to justice, addressing those 231 calls to justice. So all you blue voters should be holding your blue MLAs to account on it. I don't hear the NDP talking about it. Follow the Premier's Council on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Work. Provincially, we have the White Goose Flying Report. Municipally, I meant to say we have the White Goose Flying Report. Denying those reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing extreme racism in every institution with multiple reports that say the same thing. Demand change from election platforms and politicians. If they do not understand colonialism, racism, privilege, sexism, they have zero business running. This should be understood by all parties and local politicians, community organizations, sports clubs, businesses. Google articles on how non-Indigenous Canadians can become allies because there's multiples of them. Also, the Calgary Foundation has a great ally toolkit that you can find at calgaryfoundation.org. I talked a little bit about Stephanie Harp and I having that emergency podcast in the hopes to get allies to write their different orders of government on the crises that we're facing. You can also download the Aboriginal Alert or Missing Children's Society of Canada's apps and share when you see folks that go missing in our area. The womenshomelessness.ca had a great statement that went out about demanding urgent action to protect the lives of Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people experiencing homelessness. We also have the drug crisis and poisoning issue that's happening. So if you are using substances, please don't use alone. If you are using alone, you can create a safety plan at the National Overdose Response Service at 888-688-NORS for support. You can also download the Brave, Doors, or Lifeguard apps to help you if that's an easier way to navigate that. I also strongly support Freedom's Path Recovery Society.ca, where you can donate. They provide free one-on-one addictions counseling services, group treatment for recovery in Calgary, are queer-friendly and anti-racist. And as many of you have heard, I also fully support Canada's first 2S LGBTQ addictions recovery right here in Calgary called stonewallrecovery.ca. If you're experiencing emotional distress after anything we talked about today and need to talk, you can call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 855-242-3310. It's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can also text at hopeforwellness.ca. If more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit, you can call 844-413-6649. There is also a 60 Scoops Indigenous Society of Alberta, ssisa.ca, and they use hashtag survivor driven. The Indian Residential School Survivor and Family Hotline is 866-925-4419. Kids Help Phone still working, 688 or 1-800-668-6868, but they also have a text of 6868 4268. They also have on their website a live chat from 7 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. The Native Youth Crisis Line is 877 209 1266. The LGBTQ Youth Line no longer exists, but you can text at 647 694 4275 or go to youthline.ca. For non-Indigenous, there are distress center lines in your area and a functioning 211. And the new national number is 988. You can also text 988 or you can go to 988.ca. For Toronto, for the 2S LGBTQ community, they have an Indigenous-led crisis response pilot led by the Two-Spirited people of First Nations in partnership with two other organizations. The Indigenous-led crisis response team responds to mental health crises and wellness checks for individuals located in District 14. If you're in that area, you just call 211. Find out more at twospirits.org. For my American listeners, Two Spirit Identity has strongheartshelpline.org. You can call 1-844-7-NATIVE or 1-844-762-8433. It Gets Better Canada.org has tons of resources for 2S LGBTQ. Just a warning for the QT BIPOC. I have seen some of the organizations in Alberta listed, and not all of them practice anti-racism or have Indigenous education. So you might be better served calling the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit line, or give it a try, just with a caveat. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. This is self-care, how I take my power back. That's why I started my podcast, to speak freely without interruption, tone police, leadership shaming, gaslighting questions. So many people don't want to hear my opinion. They sure like to tell me theirs, even if they know nothing about us, colonialism, a constant surveillance of Indigenous people, our protest, our vigil, and our rights. I and many others share info on microaggressions daily. So it's just unacceptable to say them anymore. Learn about being trauma informed. Folks like me are dealing with internalized racism, gatekeepers, folks that live off the status quo, and folks who are so in their trauma, they stop people from doing the work and deplete personal resources. Internal and external racism is an everyday reality for me, Indigenous folks, folks with disabilities, QT BIPOC, and other oppressed groups. Masi Cho to my ancestors, to my granny, my mom, what strength looks like through their example. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt. My stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family and roots, and stepping up to teach me to be a proud Calgarian. It is through her I'm a second generation proud Calgarian. To my husband, thank you for producing and editing this show, being my husband, my childhood friend, father of our child, and my support down my journey of the Red Road. He has witnessed decades of sexism and racism. And to our child, we are blessed to learn from you daily, and we are honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and a stronger person. I hope that my family will be proud in the future of us trying to discuss these present day issues. I honor the Blackfoot, as the elders and members have been so kind to me on my journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot, and Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to the Blackfoot and language keepers, Dene elders, as I try to learn proper pronunciation. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge its support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening and watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com. Send in your comments or your questions. I also have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts, pin posts on social media, and if you want me to come talk to you in your group. Last thing I want to do is like a touch grass moment. There are a lot of dark things that I talk about when we see on social media. And, so it's an expression to kind of get off our screens. And I'd love to hear more about yours. So I just want to kind of share. I just recently got diagnosed with ADHD, and I just find it so funny because it's like my elders, they were just almost angry and defensive, like, You're unique. We're all unique. Everyone's unique. And we were talking about brain development at the time. So I just find it so funny because, like, in our ways, we're all, everybody's so sacred. If you're two spirit, and if you're not, everyone's just unique and loving, and we're all sacred. And then in the Western community, it's just like, oh my God, are you okay? Are you processing this now? So I just found it funny, the difference in two communities processing the same thing. And for me, I'm 47. I don't care. But I do care that the next generation has somebody that they can say in our family, oh, we have that crazy auntie Michelle. She had ADHD. And I say crazy with love. And I know it's really offensive to a lot of people. So please know I meant that in the kindest way. And I'm going to work better as this old Gen Xer tries to unlearn her language. Anyway, I want to end with giving side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not your dish. And my beautiful cousin responded, or yeah, be in my dish. Thanks, folks, for listening.